Whilst the title of my talk today is Sympathy for the Devil, I should perhaps make it clear that I'm not actually attempting to elicit your support for Lucifer. I am, however, using the word devil in a more general sense, applying it to the monstrous, and in this instance, monsters for whom some sympathy may actually be felt. As I've often repeated, Old English, medieval and Renaissance texts have been the main focus of my literary and artistic interest for many years, and therefore I have naturally gravitated to an academic fascination for the historical development of the supernatural and the monstrous. This is also born out of a fascination for Victorian and early 20th century children's fantasy literature and illustration. The tales of King Arthur, Alice in Wonderland, and The Wind in the Willows are all replete with examples of what one might describe as the monstrous, albeit in a somewhat psychedelic or anthropomorphized form. We might benefit at this point by defining what is meant by the term monster. The online etymology dictionary informs us that the word derives from the Latin monstrum, which J.J. Cohen tells us is that which reveals or that which warns. It is a word which we might also relate to prodigy, wonder, or even marvel. Whilst we often use the word to imply supernatural evil, based on its actual meaning, we can see that it is not that simple. Our definitions allow us, therefore, to include some unexpected and sacred visitors. Angels, for instance, visions of deities such as Christ would also qualify. In this painting, by Rossetti, we see Mary the handmaiden of the Lord. She doesn't at this point seem to be terribly impressed with the Archangel Gabriel, who, having invaded her bedchamber, then tells her that she is pregnant. We can also see that he is holding a lily, which is symbolically a foreshadowing of Christ's death. Thus Gabriel both reveals and warns. Macrocosmically, Cohen considers monsters to be symbolic expressions of cultural unease that pervade a society and shape its collective behaviour. At a more microcosmic level, I would note that some monsters are there specifically to teach us more important cultural responses. At times we appear to create the monsters, perhaps unconsciously as an evocation of our pity and maybe our guilt for the abjected in society. Thus, through an appeal to our humanity, we learn about empathy. In this 1931 film of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, we soon discover who the real monsters are. It is often the case that at the heart of many of the more frightening monsters for whom we feel sympathy lies a human core that has in some way been subverted against the owner's will. Werewolves, vampires, and ghosts in stories wait for us to release them from the curse that made them monsters. We see this clearly when we read medieval stories of the unquiet dead, who often serve as exemplum to the living. They suffer dreadfully as the karmic result of their past sinful behaviour. Because of the lust and venality of their living pasts, they are condemned to walk the earth in death and often in pain. We see these figures famously in a series of tales called The Three Living and the Three Dead. There are many versions of the story dating back to the 13th century. Here, the three living are saying, "Methinks these be devils three," to which the dead reply, "I was well fair. Such shall you be, and for God's love beware by me." The Three Dead Kings, arguably written by John Audley in the 15th century, is an alliterative example of this genre. Three kings hunting for boar become separated from the hunt, when three hideous corpses appear, whom it transpires are the king's forefathers. They are memento mori, reminders of the inevitability of death. We also see a version of this in The Adventures of Arthur. In the first of the two stories, Gawain and Guinevere become separated from the hunt. In some pyrotechnic detail, we are introduced to the corpse, whom we discover is Guinevere's mother. She is hideously blackened, disfigured, and bound in writhing snakes. We learn that as a result of her lusts in life, she suffers terribly and is constantly tormented by demons. The corpse informs us that the only salvation or comfort for the unquiet dead is when the living take pity on them by saying prayers in their memory. She is also an example of how the dead can be advisors to the living. In this encounter, Guinevere receives a clear warning about the future rewards for infidelity that she herself faces. Then the corpse displays the power of prophecy in predicting the destruction of the Round Table and the death of King Arthur and his knights in the British Ragnarok of the final battle against Mordred. In the two previously mentioned stories, and in another called Sir Amadeus, we see the continuing desire of the dead to interact with the living. They are motivated to pass on important messages or even actual help. So Amadeus wins a queen and a kingdom as the result of a good deed shown to a dead merchant's wife. First, Amadeus loses everything because of his reckless generosity. Thus he abandons his castle, servants, and old life in search of changes of fortune. His reward for paying the debt of the grateful dead merchant is the help of a mysterious white knight, who is eventually revealed to be the very man Amadeus helped to bury. The unquiet dead have continued to reappear in literature. In A Christmas Carol by Dickens, we see a modern iteration of the same ideas. Jacob Marley manifests with a message for Scrooge. Marley's purpose is to protect him from suffering a similar fate to his own, and thus he returns, bound in his heavy chains. Here, the three ghosts are not kings, but personifications of aspects of time. However, their role as memento mori remains. They fulfill their purpose, reminding Scrooge of the value of living a happy and moral life, free of the sin of greed, in the face of the inevitability of death. So, I hope that in this brief examination I have shown that whilst some monsters may certainly be the dark horrors which speak of cultural anxiety, it is clear that some have a more personal and helpful lesson to teach, even though they are not always angels, and in meaning to do us good, they therefore deserve our sympathy. Thank you.